Have you ever wanted to wear armor as an everyday outfit? Or maybe not every day, but a gown, and not have to worry about the heavy weight of the metal? I have two, which is why I'm planning on making myself a armor gown. Specifically, a Decrepit Armor Gown to better encompass my style. However, the armor does require a little bit of structure, and I don't want to pop right into the project, so let's make some mock-ups. Now the only thing I really need to make mock-ups for is a corseted bodice, because I want it to be altered from a normal corset pattern to better fit the shape I'm looking for. Specifically, I would like to not have it be as flat as a normal corset. I really like the hip springs that a Victorian corset has. I like it to be popped out a little bit at the waist. But the corset pattern that I have that was an online drafting tutorial is just for a regular corset, not for a Victorian corset such as the ones that you can buy online. So I'm going to try to alter my corset into the shapes that I'm looking for this particular armor kind of shape. But I don't like to make things that I'm never going to wear again, so I'm going to try to make them as wearable items. And also, while I'm doing that, it's a good chance for me to test out some other techniques that corsetry requires that I have not gotten the chance to try yet. So if you're curious about how that goes, just keep watching and we'll go through 4 different mock-ups. The last time I made a corset was for the Warrior Belle corset, and it fit so perfectly. It was so nice. I loved wearing it. It was so beautiful. I cannot for the life of me find anything that is said to be the Warrior Belle corset. All I can find is this pattern, which is corset ? Now, I did check it. It is a corset pattern, but I have no idea where it's from. I have no idea when it's from, so I have no idea if it fits anymore. And the dilemma now is that I cannot be sure if that is the pattern that I used for the Warrior Belle corset, or if I redrafted a pattern at the time so that I would have a new corset that was better fitting. Now the problem comes from, if this is the pattern I used for the Warrior Belle corset, it fit perfectly, I love it, I'm gonna use it, it's great. If it's not, then there's a reason I remade it. Like, my past corsets have not been as well fitting. They've generally been a little bit too low and other such issues. So I am concerned about that. Well, I have good news and I have bad news. I have found definitive proof that I did indeed redraft the Warrior Belle corset. So I did draft it from scratch, which means that the pattern that I was looking at earlier is an old pattern and probably an ill-fitting pattern. Bad news, I can't find it. I've only found the pattern for the shorts. I have not found the pattern for the corset. So that means that I'm going to have to redraft the whole thing from scratch, and I am not looking forward to it. So, yay! So here I am at my dining room table, eating breakfast, getting ready to start the day, because today is going to be a well-packed day of hopefully sewing and possibly cleaning, and I think that'll hopefully be everything. But anyway, so I'm sitting here, eating my breakfast, and just kind of looking around, just waiting to get started with my day. And I look over and I see under my coffee table just the little bit of plastic that, you know, you can see plastic as the light reflects off of it, and you can see like this little zipper portion right here, you know, just barely see it. And I was like, well, I should check just to see what it is. Because, you know, I've been looking everywhere. Maybe it'll be what I'm looking for. And it is! Oh my gosh, I found the overbust corset. So I don't have to redraft the corset. I can just use this one. I'm so happy. Oh, I really did not want to have to redraft the corset. I mean, I'm gonna have to soon anyway because I've got other people that I'm supposed to be making corsets for a long time in the future, but like I didn't want to have to do it for myself, especially because I have to use this corset to draft an entirely new corset pattern. I'm so happy. Now what I'm gonna do is I really want to make a Victorian kind of pattern with a big hip spring waspish shape, so I can actually get started on the armor corset, whatever the heck I'm calling it. The first thing I need to do is alter my pattern, but my original pattern is 6 pieces and I want 5, so I'm going to measure out the front and then kind of try to turn 6 pieces into 5. Really, I don't know how to explain it very well, and my camera cut out, so I don't even really remember what all I did. My main goal was to make sure that there was the same amount of space in the bust and waist, but add some space into the hip. Also, I wanted to extend the top of the corset because I didn't want a lot of cleavage showing, because that would not be a good breastplate. Then I'll cut each piece out of just some Kona cotton. I don't really want to waste any good fabric on these mock-ups, using my usual 3/8 inch seam allowance that is my magnet. Except apparently in the back where I added an inch to fold over for grommets. Then I will sew my pieces together using this 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure that the lines for my waistband and bust and stuff all line up. I want to make sure that my seam allowance will stay flat, so I went ahead and did another stitch along the seams, and another one close by to make my boning channels, as well as several boning channels in the middle of the bodice. But of course, we gotta be careful of our thread. Then I'll sew a line at the bottom. Add my boning channels, which the bones I chose for this portion are not good at all, and I would certainly not use them ever again for this purpose. Alright, so the mock-up is done. I went a little bit fancier with it than I probably should have, but that's how I usually do things, so it is what it is. I think overall it looks pretty good. There's definitely some things that are problems. Like the hip's a little too big, but that was purposeful. I wanted to have a little bit of extra space in the hip. I might even pad it a little bit. It's actually not as big as I had wanted it to be. I wanted it to have like a full-blown like wasp shape. That could also just be that I have not fully closed it in the back. I'll show you that in a minute. Let's talk about the front first. The top of the corset, I had done this angular thing up here because I was trying to like make it look like it is a breastplate from Aragorn, but I think it doesn't come across in the fabric, so the only thing that's doing it is the bones, and it just makes them jut out weirdly. So I don't really like that. I think it's sitting pretty good. Like, That bust looks pretty good and it's closed. I do think that I could probably like pinch in at the armhole just a little bit so that this part would close a little bit further, but I think that a little bit of it sticking up is not the end of the world. I can't really bend over in this corset because if I do, the whole boob will collapse. But usually I have that problem where it'll collapse even when I'm just wearing it normally, and that's not happening, so that's a good sign. And I also used the cheapest, most bendable bones that I had in my stash because I was just throwing on the first bones I could find. But I am really happy with the front. It might look a little crooked right now because I didn't give myself enough lacing in the back. So instead of pulling it over the head like I had wanted, I had to put it on backwards, tie it up, and then twist it. So it's not fully in place because I couldn't quite get it fully twisted on. So it might look like a little bit crooked, but I don't think that is because of the corset. I think that's because it is not fully in place. Now that's the front. The back, however, you can see where it laces at the top here. This part is very clearly jutting out like it's not supposed to. You can very much see the lining layer, and it's not supposed to do that. I think that it would be fine if I decide to put sleeves on this corset. I haven't decided whether or not I want to put sleeves on this particular project, but that is an option. The other thing is just how big the lacing is. Again, it's a little off center because I didn't twist it all the way, but this is a pretty big gap, and I'm pretty sure that the original pattern that I made had a smaller gap than this. I am not sure if that is because I have gained weight or if it's because when I was trying to make the hips a little bit bigger, I accidentally made the waist a little bit smaller. I know I accidentally made the waist a little bit smaller. I thought I had taken that into account and made it a little bit bigger in different areas, but I don't think I fully brought back the waist. Because this is a mock-up, I did skip a lot of steps. Like, there's no bias tape at the bottom. I just bag lined it, and it is kind of obvious that it's not, it looks a little bit weird in some places. Oh, the other issue is it's stabbing me in the armpits. I think that might just be because of the boning that I used. It's very rough and wants to stab me. I think it is a wearable corset. It's definitely not an end-all be-all, this is the beautiful corset, but it is wearable, which is what really matters. I was literally just about to take this corset off when I realized I still gotta do a seat test. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm sitting down in the corset to see if it will affect anything while I'm sitting. One thing I will say is that the problem I was just saying about if I bend over, my bust will fall out. That is happening here. The bust does want to collapse. When I use a stronger bone, I hope that will be fixed, but for now, it's not going to be. So that is something to be aware of, is that the bust will probably collapse if I sit down. But the hips are not too low, so that's good. I actually have a bit of room. I could bring them even further down if I wanted to. I have 2 inches of space, it looks like, so I could probably bring it down an inch or so, and that would give me more room to be able to do the hip spring that I want, so I might do that.
The main thing I want to do with mock-up number 2 is simply to add this extra little piece to make the front straight, as well as making sure that the pointed portions of the bust are curved out. It doesn't really matter because when I cut the pattern it'll be curved, but I want to make sure my seams are true. I went ahead and bought some cheap cotton from Walmart because I expect I'll be using it on my final project as well, and it would work for this particular mock-up. And I'm just going to cut it out using the same 3/8 inch seam allowance that I was using earlier. The only difference now is that I can cut the front portion on the fold. And also, I'm not putting in a seam allowance at the top or bottom because I plan on adding the bias tape, which is going to make it a little bit taller, but I don't expect to be folding anything over. And this lovely blue brocade was gotten from my scrap pile of fabric that I got from Joann's when it was still here, and I'm just going to cut the same pieces out of it to finish the corset. Since I'm making the same piece several different times, I didn't want to film the sewing process for each one. So on this one, I filmed the making of the grommet placket. So I just folded over that extra bit of space and then sewed a boning channel. And then I, on the other side, made sure that I got as close to the edge as possible and then sewed another boning channel. And now I can go through the rest of the project and sew even more boning channels. I'm using pre-made bias tape, so it's really easy just to line it up to the top and then follow along the folded edge. But sometimes I do kind of go over a little bit, and that makes it annoying to have to fix. Then I'll fold it over and just go along the other side to make sure it was all down pretty.
I am so mad at myself right now. I'm working on mockup 2, and I have made so far 2 mistakes and 1 oversight. The first mistake is that I was supposed to make it a little bit bigger. As you recall, I had said that the other one was slightly too small, and I wanted to add a little bit to each of the seams. I forgot to do that. I did make the hips a little bit better, so the hip spring was bigger, but the actual waist is still the same size, and I did not realize it until I was almost done sewing. I was sewing on the very last panel when I remembered. So on the very last panel, I made the seam allowance smaller, and then also for the grommet overlay thing, I also made the seam allowance smaller, so the very back panel is the only piece that's actually any bigger. So that was the first mistake. The second mistake is I went to Starbucks. Me and my sister like to hang out at Starbucks once a week to work on crafting, and I went to Starbucks, and when I went, I was working on the boning. So I was cutting the boning and all that. But I was using zip ties, so I didn't want the whatever I cut off of the zip ties to go flying and disappear into Starbucks. That would be rude. So I cut the boning right by the corset, and I cut through the corset. So in the center front, right there, you can't really see it, right there, there is a tiny cut through, but that will fray very easily, so I need to figure out how to fix that real fast and not make it like super noticeable. Now this is a mock-up, so it's not the end of the world, but I would like it to be wearable, and I had every intention of wearing it today. That's the second mistake. And then the oversight is I'm using the zip ties to do the boning channels. However, it turns out that my zip ties, the longest I can do for boning channels is this one right here. This is a full zip tie in here, and as you can see, there is still bones that are longer than that in the center front and the center back. So I think what I'm gonna do For this corset, I think I'm going to shorten the back so that I can still put the zip ties in the back. And then I will have to figure out what I'm going to use for the bones in the front. I might use the same bones as I used on the first mock-up. The problem with the first mock-up and those bones is that the bones are right up against the edge of the corset, so they're poking through the corset. But I think with this one it won't be such a big deal because the bones are going to be against the bias tape rather than against the corset. The whole point of this is to kind of test out different methods and see what I can use to make corsets in the future, because there are some things that I'm learning from making these that I didn't know before, or I did know but kind of thought didn't matter. Like, for example, currently this corset is turning out so much better than my last corset, and one of the reasons for that is because this corset is made out of the brocade, and the brocade is a much stronger material than any of the fabrics that I used on the other project, which is unfortunate because I currently don't have any strong material of this kind of level for the actual project. What you should use is cotton couture. So yeah, I'm just gonna see what I can do with the materials that I have. So yay!
At this point, I'm just going to use zip ties as my bones. They aren't very strong and probably will collapse easily, but they're also very cheap.
I wound up cutting the back shorter, so it's now a flat kind of, it goes up a little bit, but it's mostly flat. The zip ties are still too short, so you can see this one, there's like a hole, like my finger to my knuckle is without a bone here. It's not the end of the world because it's not one of the important bones, but I was concerned with these two bones. They needed to be fully out to the edge. And then also with the front bones, I did not cut that short at all because I wanted this corner structure here. I was going to use the same bones I used in the last mock-up, but that wasn't wanting to go into the corset. So what I wound up doing is actually hot gluing the zip lines together so they're kind of overlapping like this. I don't think that's going to survive. I think it's probably gonna fall to pieces pretty shortly, but right now it's working, and that's mainly what I care about. I would like this to be wearable, but it doesn't have to be, like, it's not gonna be the end-all be-all. That's not what the end of this is. So maybe in the next project what I might do is go ahead and use like contact cement instead, just something that'll hold together better than just the hot glue, which could melt if it gets hot enough. So I clearly need to work on my bias edges. I don't like to do bias edges on corsets in general because I'm so bad at them, and also for like this project, this is a very beautiful shiny brocade, and then you have like a cotton bias tape at the top. And I know what, you can make your own bias tape, but since I'm using not a lot of fabric, I didn't have a lot of fabric to be able to do that with. So in general, I avoid bias tape, and you can tell by how little I actually am good at it. So it's a little wobbly and not very good. Alright, mock-up number 2 is done. Well, ish. I never wound up doing anything to cover that hole. Don't eat plastic! Anyway, so I never wound up doing anything to like cover up that hole except putting interfacing in, but I think it's a small enough hole that I'm not too concerned about it. I also think it's under the belt at the moment, so you wouldn't be able to see it anyway. And since this isn't like a corset that I think will last me forever anyway, I'm just kind of meh, it's okay. So, things I like and don't like about this mock-up. The big thing is that I forgot to make it bigger, so it is still too small. There is still a pretty significant opening in the back here, so I will probably add an inch or two to the back. I think that the front actually fits very well, but I think the back needs to have some more so that it's not such a big gape. I will be probably doing a modesty panel in the back, but I still would prefer not to have that big of a gape in the back. One of the things that I am both happy with and not happy with is the boning. I did try to sit in this corset. It is a perfect length for me, and the front of the bust did not collapse on me, so that was a concern that I had in the last mock-up. And I don't know if that's because it's a better fit or if it's because the boning channels I used stronger boning channels and I doubled them up, but they're still only zip ties, so they are going to like collapse in the middle. For at least the back part, you really do want to have some stronger metal bones so that it doesn't do, I don't know if you can see on this corset, the kind of the center of the waist is doing this like gaping thing because the bones aren't strong enough to keep it in place. That's one of those, maybe it is what it is. One thing I am really liking about this corset, although it probably it looks weird right now, is the gape of the hips. So I really wanted there to be a hip spring, and my intention is to add in some padding so that the hips will stay out and then the skirt will come from the hips. So like on pants it looks weird because it's sticking out. But on a dress, you would have a much more accentuated hip because you've got these hip springs that are gonna push the skirt out, which is what gives you that kind of hourglass waist that everybody wants.
The only real change I made on the third mock-up is that I used 2 of my little magnets instead of 1. So we're going to skip the whole making of the base layer, and we're going to sew on these grommets as a placeholder so that I can try to use this method of flat lining, I think. So it's where you put the corset onto something that'll give it shape, and then you pin your fabric in place so that it best fits the shape of the corset. I went ahead and went to the side seams because even though this particular fabric has a little bit of stretch, I was concerned that it wouldn't have enough to shape the entire corset. So all the way to the sides I pinned it, and then I cut it using the normal 1 magnet. Then I could sew the whole piece together, again with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. It's a little bit rough, but the stretch will make up for it. Now I just have to attach it to the corset, and I've decided to make this one into a full-length dress. So I'm going to cut out strips of fabric from this scrap fabric from Amazon. Literally, it is unknown content from Amazon was on the label. But I'm just gonna cut out some strips of fabric that I can use to make frills.
At this point, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just kind of winging it. So I have the corset done as far as I can get it without actually finishing the skirt and sleeves. So I'm working on the skirt and sleeves. And I've just cut out some rectangles, and I have decided I want to add pockets because I never add pockets and I have been wanting to add pockets. So I'm gonna add pockets, and I'm gonna do a more complicated pocket than a normal pocket, so that's gonna be fun. But I'm doing that for a reason, because if I don't do the more complicated pocket, then the weight of the pocket is going to be on the stretch fabric, whereas I want the weight of the pocket to be on the corset. So there's that. Also, I think I'm gonna do the puff sleeve a little different than it would normally be. I don't exactly know how exactly I want to do it, but I think that a lot of people want, when they do an easy puff sleeve, they just take a rectangle and they gather it down. But I want it to fit into the curve of the underside of the corset, so I don't want to just gather it down. I want to actually put in the curve of the bottom of the corset, so I can put that in, but then I have to somehow shape out the shoulder, so that's gonna be interesting to figure out. One thing I did want to mention is the skirt wants to be up at the waist or around about the waist, whereas with mine I have the corset down to probably mid-hip. So I was able to make the skirt a little shorter, like 15 inches would be a normal mini kind of size skirt, but I think that this one's going to be a little bit long for a mini, even though I think it's 16 inches at the longest. But that's of course not considering any sort of removal for like hems and seam allowance. I think it saves me a little bit because if I had just done the waist, I would not be able to do as voluminous of a skirt as I'm doing now. But we'll see how it'll look, if it'll look weird to have such a low waistband for the skirt.
Then I can sew all the pieces together, although apparently my machine doesn't like this particular fabric, so it was not exactly the most fun thing to sew. Then I'll add a bit of lace at the bottom just to give it a little bit more interest. And since this is an everyday dress, we cannot do without the pockets. So I'm just gonna make a little kind of pocket thing from, I think it was a Victorian pattern that Bernadette Banner used, where you make the full pocket and then you put the placket in the center rather than on the outside. Then I'll fill the edges by hand, just because I prefer that over trying to do some weird rolled hem with my machine, because it's always not working for me. And for the first time ever, I'm actually going to make myself a modesty panel, which is just pretty much sewing a rectangle, and then I still don't know how you're actually supposed to attach it to the corset, but I found that it was pretty easy just to go ahead and hold it up against this bone on the outside of the grommets and sew it by hand.
Okay, so I wore my mock-up number 3, which is here, all day today at work, and for the most part, it worked out so well. There are still a few fit issues and some other issues that are still happening, and I think for that reason I'm going to do one more mock-up. But the problems are, I think you can see this part is sticking up because the boning is kind of pushing against the top. For mock-up number 2, I didn't have this issue, but that's because I had the bias tape sewn on the top, and also I think this fabric is stiffer and stronger, so don't think I had that much of an issue. I might have also left a little bit more space on the boning of this one, so that's the big issue that's visibly a problem. The other problem is that this part is sticking forward too much. On mock-up number 1, I had kind of taken that piece in a little bit so it would come into the chest rather than sticking out like that. But I took that away, hoping that if I brought it in on the sides, which I did do, that it would stop that from happening, because I wanted to be able to cut the front on the fold. Unfortunately, that is not the case, but it is what it is. So I think I'm gonna put that slash back in just to bring in the front a little bit. The other problems are the sizing. It's actually fitting pretty well. I think I could probably get it to close entirely if I had somebody's help. I think the waist right now is not fully closed, but it's kind of hard to get the waist to fully close on my own. I don't want the whole thing to be able to be fully closed. I want to be able to tighten it down. And this is very comfortable as it is, so I don't want to take out too much space because I still want it to be a comfortable corset, but I also would like to have some cinching, if that makes sense. Last problem with the corset is that the corset is just a little bit too long. It's at the point that if I sit down, it's not uncomfortable per se, but the corset should be sitting here, but every time I sit down or bend my legs, it pushes the corset up, which isn't a problem up here, but it does force the waist, which is supposed to be cinching in below the rib cage, to be cinching in at the rib cage, which is not very comfortable. So I am going to make the bottom of the corset just a tiny bit smaller, and then I will be making the pattern pieces just a tiny bit bigger, and of course I will be taking out that little triangular piece right there. For mock-up number 4, I want to do this fabric, which is a tulle fabric with these red roses on them. It gives me kind of strawberry dress vibes, so I was thinking about using this one, but I just had a thought. The strawberry dress is pink with red on top, and I was thinking about doing white with red and then red on the skirt. I wonder if I should do pink. At the moment, my pink fabric is kind of buried and I don't really want to pull it out if I'm not going to use it. So this is scrap fabric from a different project. It's a little darker than I would probably use, but I want to see how it will look with pink underneath this rather than the white. I also haven't ever seen it opened up. I don't actually know what it looks like. Oh, that'll look so pretty. Oh, I think the pink needs to go. Oh, that's gonna be so annoying. I literally just spent the last 2 days because I'm working overtime this week. So I do not have a lot of time to be cutting out fabric pieces, and I just spent the last 2 days finding the white fabric and cutting out the white fabric to use underneath this. Here's pink under it. That's very pretty. I'd probably use a lighter pink with a bit more shine. My Anastasia stash fabric, I think. I have a lot of that left over, and it would probably be good for this particular piece. Or we have the white, which is pretty, but I think I like the pink better. Oh no. Alright, give me a moment. I'm gonna go pull out the Anastasia fabric. Here's the fabric. Let's see. Let's give a good big spot of it. Now this is the kind of scraps that I can really only use on corsetry because I've got a whole bunch of big spots that I can use, but they're very much cut into lots of little pieces. So I would need to do something either corsetry or Victorian or something that's going to be very many small pattern pieces. But this is the Anastasia fabric, and then this would be, oh, I love that. Oh no. Siri, what time is it? Oh no. As much as I would love to continue working, I have overtime again tomorrow, which means I need to wake up early, and I just don't think that I can deal with an entire change of concept this late at night, this close to bedtime. And I did 11 hours at work today, and I just, but that is so pretty. Oh my gosh. Oh no. I'm going to bed. I'm gonna cut this out tomorrow.
And apparently, since I already did it 3 times, I decided not to film any of the making of process. So we're gonna get started with making the skirts after we've already made the rest of the corset. Starting with these finicky rolled hems I don't like. And of course gathering up because I had a little bit more of this fabric and I was able to do actual frills. Then I can attach this red fabric with the pink fabric to match the color scheme of the corset.
So I just got back from a wedding, which means I didn't have time to work on my sewing for a little while. But, you know, it is what it is. I wanted to finish this particular mock-up. Before going to the wedding because I wanted to wear it at the wedding, but after some time. So this is how far we've gotten. I did iron the frills down before I left, but then I left it on my table while my cats were here, so they decided to sleep on it, and I will have to redo it, but I think just maybe I might steam it next time. But this is how far I've gotten. It is a front closure of a corset, which I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do the modesty portion in the front, because I can go ahead and do a modesty panel on the corset, but the actual skirt is not going to have a modesty panel. I'd have to have an actual skirt down here to make that work. But for the actual corset, what needs doing now is I need to put on the sleeves and I need to finish the grommets, and then I need to do the modesty panel.
Okay, yeah, we skipped a lot of steps, but honestly, attaching that skirt was a pain in the butt. So now I'm just going to add in my sleeves. So I traced the bottom of the sleeve and then just kind of guessed on a shoulder and cut it out, and apparently attached it off screen. What am I doing? And apparently I also did my hand-sewn grommets off camera. I think I thought I filmed them on mockup 3 and didn't have to film them on this one, but apparently never filmed them on mockup 3. Anyway, I then have to line up my skirts so that they look a little bit better. Honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing right now, so I'm just cutting them and finishing off the edges and hoping it looks okay.
So we finally have mock-up number 4. I need to steam it down on the frills again because I didn't do a great job of doing it the first time. This is definitely not my favorite of the bunch. It is the cutest style-wise, but structure-wise it's not the best. The skirts are too high. You can see I have to wear jeans underneath, and I had to take out that bottom skirt because there wasn't enough fabric to make it frilly, so the fact that it was so flat on below all of these frilly layers looked awkward. So I had to take that out, and so now I have to wear jeans underneath it or something underneath it so that I can wear it, because it's not a dress anymore. It is a shirt. It is a cute shirt, but it is a shirt, not a dress. The other problem I have with it is the front closure. I think the front closure would have been fine if I had made this corset to my measurements. I like to make corsets that are a couple inches too small so that I can tight lace them. And that's what I did with this corset. But because of that, all of the seams that would normally go over the bust are pulling to the side here, and it's doing some wibbly wobbly weirdness on the sides over here, and it doesn't look amazing. All things that you probably wouldn't notice if you were just looking at it, but since I am using it as a mock-up and to test future sales items, that is something that I want to be aware of. I will probably try again to do a front closure on one that I make for somebody else with the intention of not doing tight lacing. So if I do not intend on tight lacing, I think a front closure is fine. But again, if I intend on tight lacing, it needs to be a back closure because the back has the most space where you're not going to worry about seams being not quite in the right place, whereas the front has all these curves that you have to be aware of. The other problem, and this was a problem that I had on mock-up number 3 as well, is the sleeves. Because it's a front closure, they are farther back than they would normally be because the front isn't closed as much, so this part isn't forward as much. So the range of movement is not very much at all. Like, I can do everything down here, but I can't go any further forward than that if I like really wanted to. So it's not the end of the world, it's just something I need to be aware of for future projects. I did have this problem, not nearly as bad on the yellow dress, but it wasn't as bad because the armhole was farther forward, but it still was hard to lift my arm. So that is something I have to consider when making the next project. There is a chance that on the gown that I want to make, I might do something up here to create more of an armhole, at least a better armhole. And if that's the case, I might be able to work off of that to make more space in the arms. But I think the worst thing, usually if you can't lift your arms, the problem is actually how low the armhole is. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to deal with that, and that's gonna be fun. Now that is the ugly, so now we're gonna talk about the good portion. I love this combination. Like, it is super cute. I love the pink. I love the flowers on top of it. I love the little peekaboo of pink on the skirts. And it is definitely something that I will be wearing in the future. I'm not really sure exactly what kind of bottoms I'll be wearing. I don't think the jeans look bad per se, but it feels weird to be wearing such a fancy frilly top and then just wearing some jeans on bottom. That is something to keep in mind. The other problem with this one is because I was out of my better whalebone, I do have the problem where it is again buckling at the waistband because the strength of the bones that are trying to keep this in the straight is not very strong. So it is buckling. I don't think, hopefully it's not noticeable. Like, you wouldn't look at this and be like, oh my gosh, look at all that buckle. So I think I'm happy with how this turned out. I really wish that I could have a little bit more hip in the actual corset without the skirt on it. Now, it does fit my hips very well as it is. I mean, I don't have it fully closed, but it's just barely sticking out from my hips. So it should fit my hips very well. My bust is a little tight, but again, I liked tight lace, so like that's whatever. But I think this was more of a safety mock-up than it was for actually changing anything. So I think I'm going to risk going and doing the final product. Finally. I have already pretty much reviewed every single corset as I finished them, so I'm not going to go too much in detail about the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I will kind of compare all 4 of them together. The first one was just a failure in general. It didn't turn out well. It was the attempt at an angular bust. Even though it would have been cool for the breastplate structure, it was not going to work in fabric. So that one, I'm never going to wear that again. The second mock-up is a much better mock-up as a corset, and I probably will wear it again, although it is not really my color, so it's going to be a very rare thing for me to wear again. But I think it fit very well, and I like the bias tape on the edges. I just need to learn to do them a little bit more angular instead of how they are in that version, was very curved around the corners, which is not what I'm looking for. Mock-up number 3 is my favorite out of all of them. Even though I was complaining at first about the fit of mock-up number 3, that it was a little too loose, I actually think for the sake of a dress, it's probably the best fitting out of all of them. I don't need it to be tight-laced in general, especially if I want to wear this to like a ball or something. I don't really want it to be pressing on my back such that it hurts after a while. So that's the sizing I'm gonna go with, is mock-up number 3. And then mock-up number 4, I think that one, it turned out cute and I probably will wear it again, but it's probably not nearly as successful as 2 and 3, mainly because I made it smaller so that it didn't want to close in the front, and then the hip frills would have looked better if I had more fabric. Which is why mock-up number 3 is my favorite for sizing. Because if I had done mock-up number 4 in the same size as mock-up number 3, it would have been perfect. And I also was able to test out several different techniques, and I'm kind of thinking about maybe trying to sell something of this nature, like trying to sell something like the yellow dress, where it's just a corseted fairy dress out of scrap material. But we'll see how that works. I'm not quite sure if I can do it. I probably will wind up trying to make one for my sister before ever trying to sell it. But it would be nice if I could sell it to anyone who would be wanting a little fairy dress, because it would be cheaper than the normal one that you have to order fabric for. But anyway, now that we have completed all of the mock-ups, I can finally get on to the actual armor. I am so excited. And if you would like to see what the Decrepit armor turns out to be, go ahead and subscribe down below. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns about any of these mock-ups, please let me know. And give this video a thumbs up, because it always helps. Bye!